Greetings. It has been a hot minute since I've done a video on Addictive Drums, and today I thought I'd just cover some ways that I've been using it recently to replace real drums in my home studio. So before I got into using this system myself, I was actually pretty doubtful about how effective it would be. How good can electric drums actually be in comparison to a real kit? And the answer is they're not, but I was actually pretty pleasantly surprised by how useful this system is and how good it is. So I thought I'd just showcase it today to kind of show off the ways that I've been using it, and with a couple of my good pals who are much better drummers than me. I think this will be particularly interesting or useful for any other independent or DIY musician folks out there who are looking for a way to record or practice drums with a great kit tone, but may find using or recording a real drum kit kind of impractical due to the size of the room and all the microphones and stuff that you would typically need to be able to do that. So without further ado, let's rotate straight into this. So to control Addictive Drums 2, I'm using this Roland TD-3, and I'm not really an expert on E-kits, but I'm fairly sure this is quite a common, typical model. This one's quite a few years old. All the pads on this are just like the stock regular ones that you get, although the kick pedal that I'm using is a Roland KT10, which has a much nicer and a kind of more natural feel to play than the generic one that you get. So this thing has a brain with it, obviously, that comes with a bunch of drum kits and stuff, you know, baked into it, but they don't sound very good, and also this isn't the greatest interface for kind of like editing the kit sound and changing the drums. So we're not going to be using those, but we are going to be using the brain for its MIDI capability, basically this cable here. Instead, we're going to use Addictive Drums 2 as the brain, and doing that is actually ridiculously easy. You can use Addictive 2 as a standalone software, or you can load it up in a DAW like Logic, for example, which I'm doing here. I'm basically taking a MIDI cable out of the brain, and I'm plugging that into the MIDI import of my Focusrite Scala interface. And then in Addictive Drums 2, we simply want to go to the MIDI mapping window. And then in this little menu at the top, if we navigate to this Roland column and go down to TD3, there's a preset here for the TD3, basically, and loads of other kits. So as soon as I hit OK, that would have now correctly mapped all the drums to each part of the kit. And then a couple of other things that you can do just to make sure that you have a bit of a better time with this in Logic is to make sure that your in-out buffer size is as low as it can possibly be, ideally around 32 samples to just minimize the latency. And then you may want to mess around with this recording delay, this input latency slider thing here. So you can see that we've got, even though I'm at 32 buffer size, I'm still getting 7.9 milliseconds of latency, which might be enough to kind of interfere. That can help you. And then also making sure that this sneaky little low latency input monitoring mode is enabled. So it's this little orange button here that looks like a clock. If you turn that on, then it just helps kill a little bit more of the latency in the Logic system and just makes things a little bit tighter to play. I'll just give you a little play of what the built-in sounds are like. So, and there's a few other kits, I'll just... So, yeah, I mean, they're all right. They're usable for kind of a practice context, but for actually using them in music, I don't think you'd really want to use those sounds. They're a little bit janky. So let's just switch over to Addictive Drums 2 here. So this is my kind of default kit preset. Maybe the UI is a little bit too big there, but yeah. So that is, I would say, a definite improvement over the built-in sounds in the brain. And it's pretty fun because obviously I can just customize and tweak it as much as I like, really. Or, you know, if there's anything I don't quite like about it, I can change it really easily. And, you know, I've got my laptop here next to me. So I can mess about. But yeah, this is what I like as my default. It's really easy to control kind of like how loud the ghost notes are in relation to the main accent. So you know. So for that kind of thing, kind of like jungle stuff where you're using a lot of ghost notes, obviously really nice to have the ghost notes quite loud, but you don't want that kind of unrealistically. So you can kind of adjust that with the response slider here. So I think if that's all the way to the right. And then going the other way, you'll see if I tap this really quietly. So that's a little bit more of a kind of a realistic response. So I'll just go through some of my presets and some of the ones that are built into AD2 and just have a little jam, some of them. So that is the kit preset tone that I'm using on a new track called EBDGAD or EBGAD. Which will be out really soon, but yeah, that's the preset that we're using for that. Here's a kind of fun one that I used on the Cactuar Collective record. Yeah, it's a fun one. Let's have a look through some of the really weird ones of Addictive Drums built-ins. That's fucking ridiculous. That one's pretty cool. It's got some Aphexy vibes, that one. The other thing that I really like about Addictive Drums 2 is it's super easy to change what the mappings are. So for example, we've got this this pad here, which currently is assigned to Tom 1. And then we've got Tom 2 and Tom 3 down here. So I kind of feel like 2 toms is enough. I don't necessarily need a third. And I thought, you know, maybe it'd be nice for, instead of that being a tom, be nice to have a kind of like a stack, like a trash stack or a clap stack, that kind of thing. And to do that, in this cymbal slot 4 here, I've got this, I've put in this ride cymbal, crash, sorry. And what I've done with that is just brought the release time of the volume envelope right down. So instead of it ringing out for as long as possible, it's just this kind of more deadened thing. Basically, I want to put that on that pad there. So if I go to the MIDI mapping window and I navigate to cymbal 4, if I hit the learn button and then just smack the pad that I want that sound to be on, and there we go, it's just assigned it to that pad. And yeah, I can play with the pitch of that in here or change the sample as I'm hitting, and maybe, so that feels pretty good. So that's really fun. And then, yeah, just kind of like customizing that how you want it. Maybe. So a little bit silly, that one. Let's try a different one. Yeah, that's fun. So one of the things that I was kind of always a little bit doubtful about in terms of using this for like recording instead of using real drums was just kind of like latency issues. And that was always a question hanging over my head, you know, is that actually going to be, surely you're always going to get some degree of input latency when you're recording, which is going to throw it and make it really hard to actually get a nice take. I'm just going to do it for real and actually show you what kind of results you can expect to get out of this kind of system. So I'm going to record to a clip track, and I'm just going to try and record like a drum and bass beat. I'll try to be as simple as possible so I can just focus on what I'm trying to look out for here is how tight this ends up sounding and how tight my recording to the click ends up being on the grid in software. So let's just see how that goes. Okay, so I'm not the greatest drummer, but let's just have a little look at kind of how actually on the grid that was, right? And in terms of like the input latency of my playing. Bearing in mind, yeah, again, the kit is a little bit janky and there is some latency that I'm kind of playing against, but you know, how close to these grid lines will kind of tell us how bad the latency is I am, I guess. So as you can see, we're actually pretty like tight and close to the grid, and it's not hard to play to that. You know, you can see that here I'm a little bit ahead of the beat with this kick. That's probably more to do with me just not being a great drummer than the input latency being a problem. And, you know, it is possible, I guess, once you've got your drums recorded this way, it is very easy to then just quantize it, which I suppose a lot of people do. And it's like, oh, look how great I actually am at drums. Like, but yeah, it kind of just robotically. So you can hear I messed that up a bit, and I could just slide that snare back to where it's meant to be. So but yeah, it's quite useful to be able to do that. Obviously, like, I think it's better to not quantize things 100%. But a lot of the times, like, people do end up needing to quantize real recorded drums. It's like a thing that does go on in music production. So having that as an option to do that so quickly here is really cool. And, you know, this is just a nice way of playing in kind of like electronic beats, I think, because you get some of that humanness in the feel, right? So what I would personally do is I would never quantize something like that by 100%, because that's just a bit ridiculous. But just softly doing it a little bit, we'll just tighten that up, but then it will still ensure that everything has kind of got a bit more of this kind of human off the grid feel. And it's not just like rigidly programmed to a grid, which is quite a nice way to do it. So that's cool. And then obviously, again, makes it really, really easy to then go ahead and put stupid effects on that and mess around with more creative options and doing silly things with your drums like this. So whilst I'm absolutely having the time of my life playing this kit and messing about with all these sounds, I'm fully aware that I'm not actually the greatest drummer, and I'm not really as tight or as capable as I'd like to be yet, which is why I often get my mates involved on my tracks who can actually play drums. So in order to give a better demonstration of whether or not this actually works well, let's let some more capable drummers sit at the throne. So this is one of my good pals called Sam Hughes, who's a really great session drummer, and he used to play in my band Luo years ago. I was just curious, is the actual system, the setup, the TD-3 and Addictive Drums 2 going to be capable of handling Sam or Mole, was more the question.
I think it needs to be something like that.
And so when somebody like him is sat at this kit, I think latency issues just disappear. It's obviously not really a problem and it's not getting in the way of our session. I like to think that these next few clips kind of prove that, and the proof is in the pudding, right? So here's a little behind the scenes footage of Sam recording a track called Ebgad that we've been working on together. And I've also been using this same setup to work with my good pal James, aka Mole, and it's really, really fun. We can do cool things like all record a drum part for a song and then kind of mix and match different bits from each of us, or layer them together for kind of like 2 drummer sections of absolute drum madness. Also, this system works really well for a rehearsal context, so me and Mole have been using it to practice our set for live gigs. By using AD2's multi-output mode, it's basically possible to set up the drum mix in your DAW so that it's essentially the same process or the same feeling that you'd get from mixing real acoustic drums. And you can go even further with processing or tweaking the sound to get it much better than you could just using the internal effects and the mixing options within AD2. And you can also then introduce other third-party plugins and your own effects to AD2 sound and make it even more your own. So for example, here's the Addictive Drums in a final mix context. Can pretty much more easily pan everything around or set the levels how I want them a bit more flexibly than you can internally in AD2. And we can also add individual buses or group different parts of the drums. For example, if I want a bit of reverb just on the snare, I can send that off to a bus. And I can also use other custom reverb effects to change the sound of this much further than I could if I was using AD2's internal reverb effects. Or I could do things, like you could put a reverb on the entire drum mix minus the kick, and that gives you a kind of a bigger, roomier sound that way. And you can also set up your parallel compression and blend that into taste to get a bit more punch out the drums. All these standard tricks basically that you use on a full acoustic mix is all possible here. And then of course that also goes for things like saturation or clipping to raise the level a bit and to add a bit of character or drive to the sound. And EQing the drum mix so that it sits even better with the rest of the instrumentation in the mix. That's all really possible and really easy to do. So this is quite a nice way of doing things. So I hope as ever that this has been a fun insight into what's possible with Addictive Drums 2, how it can work really nicely as a creative tool for experimentation and coming up with different kit sounds, how it can be used as a practice tool for getting a really great kit tone for just satisfyingly playing along to your favourite grooves and kind of practicing music that way, and function in a final mix context for a released track, which is to me probably the most impressive thing about it. I'm not really sure if this could ever fully replace recording real drums in a studio. That's always going to be different, isn't it? Let's face it. I mean, can it ever be as good as actually going into a real room and recording a real kit with really nicely built drums with a whole load of really nice expensive mics and outboard and an engineer who knows what they're doing? Probably not. That's probably always going to be the better way to go. But, considering the fact that that can get pretty costly, for me personally, the setup has been pretty game-changing for my music production process and kind of the process of being an artist. So I think it probably would be for other DIY musicians as well. And that's why I thought I'd put this information together in this video and share this all with you. Anyway, I'm going to wrap this one up here for today. As ever, I hope this has been an interesting or at least just a fun insight. And if you have any questions or comments, feel free to let me know down below. But for now, thanks very much for watching, and hopefully I'll catch you in the next one. Take it easy.